No one with sense questions your game. You're a winner, you're a champion, a Heisman Trophy winner. We know what you bring to the table.
Does Bryce Young have the frame and the toughness to make it through the course of a playoff run? Because,
man, he is small.
I believe Bryce Young will be that good, and I don't care how short he is.
For me, there's no doubt that I believe he's the best quarterback in the draft.
With that being said, I'll be declaring for the 2023 NFL Draft.
Bryce Young was the best quarterback in his recruiting class, was set to be the first quarterback taken in the 2023 NFL Draft, and was the first ever Alabama quarterback to win the Heisman Trophy. He has proved that he's capable of playing with or without talent surrounding him, but after a shocking twist of events that no one could have predicted, Bryce Young's status as the #1 quarterback in this draft class is in jeopardy. Young might be a born winner who attended one of the best high schools in the country, then attended one of the best collegiate football programs in the country. However, in the end, one of these decisions could end up backfiring on Bryce, causing him to not only miss out on being selected first overall, but could cost him millions of dollars. What happened to Bryce Young to cause his draft stock to be in consistent flux? Will Bryce Young even be the first quarterback taken in the NFL Draft? Even more shockingly, how does Bryce Young have a chance to be the best Alabama quarterback in NFL history, despite never being able to do what every single other Alabama quarterback has done for the last 10 years? At this point, you may know who Bryce Young is, but this is what they're not telling you about Bryce Young. Young was born on July of 2001 to a small family in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. From the beginning, Young always had great guidance. His parents, Julie and Craig Young, knew their son Bryce had an affinity towards sports, and seeing the athletic potential in him before high school even began, the Young family decided to move to Pasadena, California, home to plenty of powerhouse high school football programs. On the surface, this might seem perfect, however, this would end up being the start of a problem that nearly ended Bryce's football career right before it started. Growing up, Young was always good at using his time wisely when it came to football. This is because his father, Craig Young, was a mental health expert, and he had a very unique view when it came to football. His rationale was that if you are passionate and have fun with football, you will get better naturally. However, if you are obsessed and focused on every small detail 100% of the time, you will ruin yourself, because no person, especially a quarterback, is perfect. This might have helped Bryce avoid some traps earlier on in his career, but eventually down the line, it nearly led to his downfall. However, if we can all agree that no quarterback is perfect, Bryce Young might be the closest thing to a perfect quarterback that we've ever seen. When Bryce was in 8th grade, his father Craig took him to see coaches at Cathedral High School in Los Angeles, California. And Kevin Pearson, head coach of the football program at Cathedral High, immediately saw the potential in Bryce. In fact, after just one practice, Kevin pulled Craig Young aside and told him, "Look, your son is special, and I know you know that, but a lot of people are going to want a piece of him and say they trained him and all that stuff. Don't let people change his throwing mechanics, because naturally he has a beautiful stroke." In other words, Bryce Young was a gifted passer all the way back to when he was in middle school, simply because he always had a perfect throwing motion. Basically, anyone who tried to make him into a robot or a carbon copy of what the paradigm was for a quarterback, anyone who tried to make him look like one of the QBs in their factory, wasn't the quarterback coach that Bryce needed. But the problem with that was Bryce Young wasn't like everybody else. This might be a positive for the majority of his career, but eventually his uniqueness almost led to his downfall in the most unpredictable way imaginable. In his freshman season at Cathedral High School in Los Angeles, as a 14-year-old, Bryce Young was already the best quarterback on the roster. The only problem was senior and 3-year starter Andrew Tovar was already starting. Head coach of the team, Kevin Pearson, said, "I was loyal to the kid that was in the program. Bryce's family was good with it. They are not me people. Bryce was never a me guy, and he still isn't." It might have helped Young at the high school level to be a non-selfish quarterback. However, down the line, this character trait might have ended up costing him hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions. Despite not being named the starter at the beginning of the season, Bryce Young played so well that in close games he was the only one they called upon to win football games. Not the nearly 18-year-old senior quarterback with 3 years of starting experience under his belt. They went to a 14-year-old freshman with no high school football experience because he was just that damn good. In limited time, freshman Bryce Young completed 65% of his total passes, had nearly 16 1,300 total yards, including nearly 160 rushing and 18 total touchdowns, 4 coming from the ground, to just 6 total interceptions. His freshman season was just a small glimpse of what was to come, as in year 2 as a sophomore, Bryce Young finally got to show out as the full-time starter. Show out he did. In 12 games played, Bryce Young put up 49 total touchdowns, 8 of them being rushing, and 3,718 total yards, with only 287 of those yards being rushing. In addition to that, he threw only 3 interceptions, meaning that Bryce Young had a touchdown to interception ratio of 16.3 touchdowns per interception. After his sophomore season, Bryce Young transferred to Mater Dei High School in Los Angeles, California, one of, if not the best high school football program in California. Although the decision would pay off in the short term, it did have some unforeseen consequences down the line that without a doubt hurt Bryce Young a lot, and we'll get to that in a sec. For now, the reason he made this decision is not only would he be playing against bigger and better opponents, but he would also face off against the #1 quarterback in the class of 2020, DJ Uiagalelei. DJ was the #1 quarterback in his class for the same reason Ryan Leaf was a top prospect in the 1998 NFL draft. He's tall, he's big, and has a rocket for an arm. Fortunately for Young, however, he wasn't the Peyton Manning to Uiagalelei's Ryan Leaf. He simply didn't have the overhand mechanics like Peyton. He wasn't a natural pocket passer like Peyton, and definitely wasn't as tall or as big as Peyton. This is an unfortunate truth that has the potential to change Young's football career in ways nobody could have ever predicted. So if Bryce wanted to dethrone DJ Uiagalelei as the #1 quarterback in his class, he would have to do it in a way that nobody expected. Not only would Young have to create his own game, but at Mater Dei, you were expected to be great. The school boasts such alumni as Matt Leinart, Matt Barkley, Colt Brennan, and even JT Daniels. So what did Bryce Young do in his first season at Mater Dei? Well, he not only helped the team win a national championship in his first season starting, he also was the deciding factor in one of the greatest high school football games of all time. Picture this, a sellout 10,000 person crowd at the Santa Ana Bowl. Who's playing? IMG Academy versus Mater Dei, the top 2 programs in the nation. Mater Dei found themselves down 4 points with less than 2 minutes to go, and head coach Bruce Rowlandson didn't have much faith in his team to get the job done. But when he looked to his side, he saw junior Bryce Young staring back at him as he walked onto the field to try and win the football game. Young proceeded to go 6 for 6 passing on the drive and took the ball himself on a read option to win the football game. That was the moment that coach Bruce Rowlandson knew that Bryce Young was special. Young finished his junior season with 43 total touchdowns, 4 of them being rushing, and over 4,000 total yards, 286 of those yards coming on the ground. Not only did Bryce Young defeat IMG Academy, and not only did Bryce Young win the national championship, but he did so while being the best player on his team. Hopefully Bryce Young cherished that experience, because little did he know what would happen just a few years later. That offseason, Young would commit to the University of Southern California, but after a call from former Alabama offensive coordinator Steve Sarkisian, Bryce Young flipped Crimson Tide and intended to play for the University of Alabama. When asked about flipping his commitment from USC to Alabama, Bryce Young answered,
For me, it was all about doing what was best for me, pushing myself to be the best. And it was clear that Alabama was the best option. So, that's what I decided to do, and it's been the best decision that I could make.
In his senior season, Young posted his best statistical season to date, totaling 68 total touchdowns, 58 being passing touchdowns, and nearly 5,000 total yards, 357 yards from rushing. And he would have won the national championship yet again had it not been for a missed blocking assignment, causing a game-ending sack in the playoffs. Bryce Young had just capped off one of the best high school football careers of all time, and was undoubtedly one of the most talented quarterbacks to attend Mater Dei in program history. Not only was he the #1 quarterback in California, he was the #1 quarterback in the country, and he even outranked his rival DJ Uiagalelei. In college, Bryce Young would go on to accomplish goals that no other Alabama quarterback had ever accomplished. However, in the same vein, he failed to accomplish what many other Alabama quarterbacks do yearly. Bryce Young's career would go from all-time highs to all-time lows, and for some reason today, some Alabama fans view Bryce Young as a failure. During Bryce Young's freshman season at Alabama, he would sit behind junior starting quarterback Mac Jones in 2020. Young would ride the bench all the way to Alabama's 18th national championship, officially accomplishing the game's highest goal in just his freshman season. Let's be honest, whenever Bryce Young puts on his NCAA championship ring, you won't be thinking about his college career. You'll be thinking about the fact that he wasn't the starter himself. As a matter of fact, Bryce Young probably feels the same way as Carson Wentz does whenever Carson Wentz looks at his Super Bowl ring. Bryce Young, above all else, wanted to win a national championship. Unfortunately, nobody could predict the groundbreaking NCAA shattering course of events that happened later. In 2021, with Mac Jones being selected in the first round of the NFL draft, sophomore Bryce Young was the brand new starter. And with his highly touted high school career being talked about by Crimson Tide fans everywhere, much was expected from the first-year starter. And Bryce Young delivered that and more. In the first game of the season against 14th ranked Miami, Bryce Young posted a 71% completion percentage for 344 passing yards and 4 touchdowns. Not only was Alabama winning football games, but with Bryce Young, they were doing it as a pass-first team, which was brand new to Alabama when you consider Nick Saban's offenses historically were focused around running the football. After setting the college football world alight, Bryce Young would really run away with the Heisman Trophy award in weeks 10 and 11 against 21st ranked Arkansas and New Mexico State, when he combined for 829 passing yards, completing 83% of his passes and combined for 10 total touchdowns and no turnovers. Bryce Young was on top of the world, and he better have had soaked it in, because no one could have predicted how Alabama's storybook season would eventually come to an end. Young's superhuman performance lasted all the way up until the national championship game against Georgia, where for the first time maybe ever, Bryce Young struggled against the ferocious Georgia Bulldogs defense. And the brightest of lights were finally shining on Bryce Young. He posted his most paltry game to date, a box score of 35 completions out of 57 attempts for 369 passing yards, 1 touchdown and 2 interceptions. Those 2 interceptions accounted for nearly 30% of his total turnovers on the season. Why was Georgia's defense so tough and Alabama's roster not as flush with talent as they had been in the past? Well, depending on who you ask, most people will point to the fact that NIL deals, which would cause talent to go elsewhere, was a huge reason why the Alabama Crimson Tide were not nearly as dominant that year. Young would go on to become the first sophomore Heisman Trophy winner since Lamar Jackson in 2016, and the first Alabama quarterback to ever take home the award after putting up 4,872 yards passing, 47 touchdowns, just 7 interceptions. Not only that, but despite Alabama losing multiple key players in the draft, many expert college football analysts still expected Alabama to be a top 4 team in the country. Because, well, they're Alabama, and they have Nick Saban, and they have the defending Heisman Trophy winner returning. However, things didn't go quite as planned for the Alabama Crimson Tide. In fact, even Bryce Young himself never could have foreseen what would happen next. Alabama would start off the season perfect, 6-0, but after barely beating an unranked Texas A&M team in week 6 by just 4 points, it was clear that the 2022 Alabama Crimson Tide were not the dominant SEC force we all knew them as in the past. In fact, just 1 week later, against number 6 ranked Tennessee, Alabama would lose 49-52, and any hope that they had of making the college football playoff went out the window when they lost to number 15 ranked LSU just 2 weeks later by a score of 31-32. Alabama would just miss out on the college football playoff, being ranked number 5 in the whole country. And in the Sugar Bowl against Kansas State, Alabama ended a rough season with a bittersweet 45-20 victory, with Bryce Young totaling over 300 yards passing and 5 touchdowns, ending one of Alabama's worst collegiate seasons in a decade with his best performance of the year. Despite ending the season on a high note, Young finished the year with his completion percentage regressing to just 64%. He finished with over 1,500 less passing yards than the year prior, however, still had 32 passing touchdowns to 5 interceptions. However, for some reason, despite regressing and putting up his worst year of his collegiate football career, Bryce Young is still in the conversation for the number 1 quarterback in a relatively deep QB class in this year's NFL draft. It's all because the Alabama dynasty is slowly coming to an end. Allow me to explain. Prior to NIL deals, the money you could give to an athlete to attend your school had to be in the form of a gift to the family, or small enough that when exchanged, the student athlete won't be making headlines with a fistful of cash. However, now with NIL deals, there is another incentive besides playing time and competitiveness tempting student athletes to attend schools. Now, one of the biggest incentives is money. Without NIL deals, I doubt USC would contend for the college football playoff in year one of the Lincoln Riley era. Without NIL deals, I doubt Texas A&M finishes with the best recruiting class in NCAA history in 2022. What I'm trying to get at is that the NIL deals distribute player talent more evenly throughout the NCAA simply because the 4 or 3-star recruits that would normally sit on the bench at Alabama, Clemson, and Georgia are now playing elsewhere due to the financial incentive. Does this mean that Alabama will fall off the face of the planet? Absolutely not. In fact, since they have Nick Saban, expect them to be contenders every season because he's their coach and his track record is insane. However, what I am saying is that the NIL deals make it harder for one team to have a ton of talent, meaning that in 2022, the season after Bryce Young's Heisman Trophy campaign, he was playing on one of the least talented Alabama teams in recent memory. In other words, without all of the talent surrounding him in 2021, in 2022, we got to see what Bryce Young would play like when he's the one who needs to make the plays. Despite what you may hear from the reactionary critics and Twitter warriors, Bryce Young actually played fairly solid for a guy who needed to carry most of the load by himself. He has shown that he can get through his progressions, and when it comes to pocket mobility, Bryce Young is a natural. However, there is one thing outside of his control that is tanking his draft stock. Young's mechanics might not be picture perfect like Drew Brees, but Aaron Rodgers never had perfect mechanics coming out of the draft either. Is Bryce Young Aaron Rodgers? Absolutely not. In fact, anyone making those comparisons probably needs a lobotomy. All I'm saying is that he has the ability to throw perfect spirals 80 yards off of one foot. All he needs is for a coach to help him be consistent. Another quarterback who didn't have perfect mechanics but could do the same thing was Zach Wilson. So just because he has these traits doesn't mean he is guaranteed to be a franchise quarterback. However, what Young does better than most quarterbacks is he has a lightning fast release. This guy can get the ball out of his hand in a blink of an eye. Bryce Young was born to be a quarterback. However, the one gripe NFL teams have with Young is his size. Young is barely 6 foot and was listed as under 200 pounds. Basically, in the world of football, Bryce Young is an Isaiah Thomas and everyone else is a Yao Ming. In recent years, many smaller quarterbacks have missed a significant amount of time. And if you think this isn't a real concern surrounding Bryce Young, one of the main reasons that Lamar Jackson isn't getting the contract he wants is because of his recent injuries, which stem from the fact that he's a smaller quarterback that is run first. Now, that's not to say Bryce Young is a run first quarterback, but it is justified when you realize that Young was injured during the NCAA season bracing for a normal everyday tackle. There is nothing stopping that from happening again in the NFL. And potentially it's even worse in the NFL due to the larger defenders in the NFL compared to college. Personally, while I do understand having some injury questions about Bryce Young due to his size, you can't teach that it factor that Bryce Young clearly possesses. As of right now, Bryce Young could potentially be the #1 quarterback taken in the NFL draft. Or do you think CJ Stroud is better? Do you think CJ Stroud showed enough in a shootout loss to Georgia to overtake the #1 spot from Bryce Young? Or maybe the project of Anthony Richardson's better? Or what about Will Levis? Is he the best NFL fit? It's not Bryce Young. Who do you think will be the first quarterback taken in the 2023 NFL draft? Let us know in the comment section down below who we should do a deep dive on next. Aside from that, I'm your boy Mike. I'm dropping our mic until our next upload.